This is not the time to be a shrinking violet. It doesn't work because bullies will always continue bullying until you stop them and say, hey, you can't do that. So they need to know that they are worth more than,
Right.
and it cannot just be defined as a phrase called perimenopause and menopause. It's not them. It is just something that happens, but it is not them. It does not define them, and it's not their only story, if you like. And if they can assert themselves and say, yes, I deserve to feel, to be able to have a place, a soft landing. This is natural. It's nothing I've done. I am not at fault, and therefore you cannot pin it onto me.
Hello, my listeners. Welcome to today's episode. I am your host, Mary, and I'm very excited to introduce my upcoming guest, a fellow Canadian, Dr. Tayo, hailing from Toronto, Canada. Dr. Tayo is a former radiologist turned menopause wellness expert, and she's here to share her wealth of knowledge and insights with us. In this upcoming conversation, we'll explore the challenges and misconceptions surrounding menopause that so many women face. From her personal journey with menopause symptoms to the alarming lack of medical training in this area, Dr. Tayo brings a unique perspective that is both empowering and enlightening. Dr. Tayo is not just a doctor with multiple board certifications and a fellowship in radiology. She is also a best-selling author and a trusted authority on midlife health and wellness for high-achieving women. Even as a medical professional, she was blindsided by the hormonal changes that hit in our 40s, but she turned her experience into a game-changing approach that can help women thrive without risky medications or procedures. Together, we'll discuss her revolutionary 5-superpower system, which focuses on the key strategies women can use to manage menopausal symptoms effectively. We'll also tackle important societal issues, such as misogyny and ageism, as well as the economic impact of the lack of support for menopausal women in the workplace. Dr. Tayo has been featured in major U.S. outlets for her work, which advocates for increased awareness, education, and support for women in the workplace and beyond. And her website, Get Your Sassy Back, is all about promoting health and vitality, tapping into our inner wisdom, as well as some key lifestyle protocols to get us there. So get ready for an inspiring and informative discussion that empowers women, quite honestly, at any stage and age of life. Dr. Tayo, welcome.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Mary. I am happy to be part of your efforts to also spread the message and know that there is something menopausal women can do.
Absolutely. And so let's just dive right into that. But before we share your expertise, can you share a little bit about your personal journey through menopause and how it led you to become a menopause wellness expert?
Well, I'm a physician, not practicing anymore. I was a radiologist. So on this particular day, I was sitting at work and all of a sudden I had this strange sensation. It was a bit like an electric shock. And it basically started from my chest, went up to my arms, and then up to my neck and no further. So I didn't know what to make of it. I left it alone. It happened again, and then it happened again. And I found that the occurrences and the episodes wouldn't allow me to concentrate on my work. So I'm thinking, what could it be? So I'm going through my brain and thinking, what could it be? We have this self-analysis thing, and I said, okay, it's not an emergency. I don't need to go to the emergency room, but it was very uncomfortable. So I started going back in my mind, and that was when it suddenly hit me that even though it wasn't hot and it wasn't a flash, it was my version of a hot flash, and which was later I found that hot flash is just a name, it's not typical. And some people have
Right.
had. So that was it. And I went back and realized that all the various things that had happened for the past 2 to 3 years, I couldn't sleep well, and I used to be a good sleeper. I was putting on weight, and that was never a problem before, no matter what I did. And I was low energy. It took all I could just to get through the day with enough energy and verve. And it suddenly occurred to me that all of those things were the predators, if you like, to this hot flash, which I didn't recognize, even though I'm a physician. And just to put a caveat there, we're not taught anything about menopause at that time anyway in medical school, maybe 1 hour. And just to say that, hey, when your periods stop, it's due to your hormones going down and it's menopause, and that's the end of that. There was no symptoms, what the woman feels. The women were out of the equation. Like, it was clinical. So that was
Yeah.
it, really.
And I'm amazed now that we're seeing so many female doctors or women that are working in the arena of wellness that are taking charge and changing that narrative and stepping up and saying, okay, this is happening to me.
Mm.
We have no training on this. We have to change this. And I'm so thrilled to see that this is taking shape in wellness, that hormone health, women's health is finally being brought to the forefront.
Mm.
So, what exactly then, when you went through your journey of the menopausal symptoms that trigger you to say, this is time to make a change, to do something for myself and for other women?
Well, I know I didn't want to remain that way. I was spending all hours just trying to get my work done and doing nothing else besides. And I knew that there was more I wanted to do. So it was not an option not to do something. The point is, what was the something that I needed to do? And I just couldn't find answers out there. Yes, I went down the traditional route of hormone treatment. I'm a physician after all. And you have certain, shall we say, okay, this, you do this. But it didn't work for me. And I found that to be true for a whole number of women, and it just didn't work for me. So after a period of 9 months where I wasn't sleeping, hardly, still not improved much, and I was getting higher and higher doses of the hormones, I decided, guess what? This is not the answer. It may be for some people, but it wasn't the answer. And I started digging much deeper into it and saying, guess what? I need to get outside of that particular box that I'm in, and the answer must lie outside of it. So I did a ton of research. Did a ton of experimentation on myself. What works? What didn't work? Throw the things that didn't work at all. Throw the things that were impractical and too complex. And it was just a process of iterating, small steps,
Okay.
bit by bit, until I began to find that the funny thing was that when it really, really, I realized that I was onto something was when I finally ditched those hormones and realized that the things that I had been doing now had free reign, if you like, to take over and to give me this wellness that I so desired. So it was the hormones seemed to be suppressing my ability to really get the other things I was doing into shape. I was
Wow.
supplementing hormones. That was the first thing I went on. So I was so once I went off that regimen, then the other things I was doing, which were mainly lifestyle and all those kind of things, I took a whole body approach, which was very novel at the time, and I realized that holy cow, this is working, and it's working better when I'm not taking the hormones.
Oh, interesting. Because
Yeah,
there's, of course, so much, and it's individualized, as we well know. Every woman's
yeah.
approach to how she's going to manage her symptoms, she's in the driver's seat. She gets to decide. And I like that you said that you went through many iterations to figure out what was going to work, because that we have to approach it with that open mind and that experimentation mindset, if you will. But
It,
in discovering that, and it states it right on your website. I love that.
oh
You
wow.
find our superpower.
Yes.
Oh,
There are a few really good quotes out there, and one of my favorite, don't have it off head, I'll go look for it, is by Germaine Greer, but
okay.
saying that it's something we must fight for because at the end of it, there is such an amazing. You look at the women who are making it, kicking ass, etc. Menopause, yes, it happens, and most women will struggle through it. But if you manage to get through it with the right approach, man, the world just opens up. You're confident, you kick ass, you don't have to kowtow to anything. You are more sure of yourself, and there's nothing better than living in your own skin fully.
Yes, exactly. Being empowered,
Mm,
take agency of menopause, which is what I say all the time. Absolutely.
fantastic, Mary.
Is it risky though? Because I'm quite curious with the HRT or menopause hormone therapy, as we say here in Canada.
Mm.
Is it risky then when a woman has been put on it to decide, okay, maybe I do want to ditch them? What things should they be looking for to decide whether they are ready to go off of it or if it was wrong in the first place to go on it?
Mm, mm. And here is my considered opinion.
Okay.
Not everybody needs hormone replacement because there are some
Mm-hmm.
things hormones can't do for you anyway. And so this brigade which goes for lifelong hormones, I don't subscribe to that because you're putting what is essentially another substance in your body. What are the other methods of making sure that what the things, the underlying features of what that hormone decline seem to do to you, can you replace them? Can you sleep better? Can you let go of your cravings? Can you not lose muscle as fast? Can you not be stressed out all the time because lower estrogen makes your cortisol levels rise, and so you become more anxious and stressed out? Can you do the things that mitigate it and eventually end up replacing, when I say replacing, the functions of the hormones without taking hormones themselves? So my personal belief now is that yes, there is a cohort of women, usually acute symptoms. You are beside yourself. You can't sleep. You're not something, and it just gives you a breather.
Mm-hmm.
And once you get that breathing space, hopefully under the watch of a gynecologist who's also keeping watch on the various things, because it's a substance and it will have its side effects, and you want to make sure that you're not one of those where
Mm-hmm.
it has severe side effects. So you're being monitored. And when you are kind of like, okay, fine, at the same time, institute those important things, generate energy, look after your brain health, which is important for practically every woman I know,
Mm-hmm.
even more so than weight loss, I'm told, and how to deal with stress, how to be much more serene and calm. And once you get all those things together and you start doing them alongside with the hormone treatment, if you're on it, there comes a time when you say, okay, the acute phase is over. Let me get the other things to do their stuff.
Okay, I love that. It's like the a little extra training wheels or a crutch, if you will, until
Perfect.
right. So
Perfect.
well, so well explained. And so now when you work with women, you have a strategy that allows them to step into that greatness and
Yes.
use all those natural techniques and tapping into themselves to find the solution to manage life when it changes with the hormone egress. I
Yes.
would love to talk about this program and all the steps that you employ to help women get back to the best version of themselves.
Oh, with pleasure, Mary, with pleasure. I had been doing it and personalizing to each woman, but it was like, okay, you talk about these things and how to actually put it systematically and how to make sure that they understand that we are using modern cutting edge techniques as well as the other proven strategies we had in the past. We can't throw out the baby with the bathwater. There are things our parents knew about getting older, about doing things which are still applicable to our health today. And part of the problem is because we've ditched those things for the modern conveniences and didn't realize that there was a consequence to them. So women working all hours because they're working and not taking a rest, not sleeping well, going to bed late, eating takeout and deliveries all the time, sitting and driving all the time, all those things, they look small, but when they add up, they have a huge consequence on our wellness down the road. So what happens now is I've introduced what I'm calling Menopause 3.0. And if I can, I'll explain what Menopause 3.0 is as opposed to 1.0 and 2.0.
Please do.
Okay, I call 1.0 where, because menopause is a recent thing, human beings are one of the very few species of animals who outlive their reproductive age. Basically, once reproduction finished, you'd already had the children, and the children are having children. It was time for Mother Earth to say, you've had enough, let's go. In that time, it wasn't a thing. So it was in the early 1900s that the concept of living longer because of health improvement, actually more like 1940s, I think, that the concept of living beyond your reproductive era started coming into being, and you haven't started having women having menopause and suffering from the symptoms, and nobody knew what to do for a while. Then they figured out, okay, this is what is happening. The estrogen is going down, the progesterone and testosterone. Women also have testosterone. And they started looking for a replacement, a direct replacement for it. Well, they couldn't get it from other women, of course. So what they did was get pregnant horses' urine and extract the estrogen. But guess what? Since when did a pregnant horse and your menopausal women, what do they have in common apart from that estrogen? It's not the same structure. They discovered that there were so many side effects, and they started doing this study, which they call the Women's Health Initiative study, which you've obviously heard of,
Mm-hmm.
but was not interpreted properly. The audience was not properly selected. They were postmenopausal women way into their 60s, not in their 40s to 50s, which is most of the women we're talking about. And it misinterpreted the data and scaring women and thinking there was an increased cancer risk. So where the
Right.
uptake of hormone treatment was about 40%, because it was a real thing, having all those symptoms and hot flushes and wanting to get away from it. The uptake of hormones fell from 40% to 4%, mainly because of the cancer scare, and has never recovered. Even though
Right.
now we have newer hormones, which are called bioidentical hormones. So it has identical structure with our human female estrogen, but it is from plants. So even though
Yes.
it's still synthetic, it's still made it is bioidentical. So it doesn't have the same side effects as horse's urine, which is clearly completely different. So that's what's around right now. And the third one, so that's what I call when the hormones came in, that was menopause 2.0, when they tried to replace it with all those various things, bioidenticals, hormones, etc., exogenous things. Now, when we come to menopause 3.0, we take what we know about menopause, which means going back to some of our ancestral lifestyle habits, which worked, otherwise we won't be here how many hundreds of thousands of years later, as well as harnessing modern technology, harnessing apps and wearables, harnessing those kind of technologies that could get us results, steady results, and get it steady results faster. So that's what I'm calling menopause 3.0, because yes, there's a whole lot of people, you go to your doctor, that's menopause 2.0. Menopause 3.0 will say, guess what? What can we use? Focusing on lifestyle. That's not to say you don't need hormones, but focusing on lifestyle features and specific lifestyle in a certain way to get you the results you want in the least possible time and much easier than before.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And those lifestyle methods.
Yes, I divide them into three broadly speaking, but even so, those
Okay,
three
good.
are, say, I say energy generation. One of the first things that it does is suck the life out of you. You're tired, you
Yes.
don't know what's happening, you feel overwhelmed, you can't cope any longer, and you're thinking, I just can't go on like this. It's just, I can't go on like this. And what happens when women do that? They begin to either take some time off work if they can, because some places, I've come across several places where they can't take time off work. Otherwise, it looks bad on your resume. It looks bad on your assessments that, hey, you're not pulling your weight, even though menopause is natural. There's no allowance for women having time off for menopause. So they suffer, bear it, but downgrade their responsibilities and their positions just so they can cope. But of course, if they do that, they can no longer catch up anymore. They just can't. So in doing that, there is also the business of trying to say, hey, we need to have a career, but if I can't cope with my career, I may have to drop out of work altogether. And there are people who have dropped out of working altogether. There are also people, unfortunately, because of the severe stress, those are a very, very small minority, but there's still enough who have opted to opt out of living. And for menopause, that should never, ever, ever come to that. So there's all those little things that we say, not little things, huge things that women no longer feel powerful. On top of all the social stigmas of saying you're past it, you're on the shelf, confidence plummets, and they don't know what to do and they don't know where to turn. So we have to turn
Exactly.
all those things around. We have to turn those things around and allow women to realize that you get past menopause, it's going to be the best time of your life, the very best, I promise.
Yes. You just have to get out of the fog of war.
Yes.
I'm glad that you did touch on the fact that women are giving up on their careers, giving up on their hopes, dreams, aspirations, and yes, unfortunately, on themselves. And there's a very high statistic, alarming statistic of women in their late 40s is one of the highest demographics for suicide. It is a terrible circumstance, but
Terrible.
stress can take hold in ways that diminish all confidence and yeah, just render you helpless. But there is hope.
Absolutely.
And
And just as you mentioned that statistic, when you see some things in the papers, as you said, women in their 40s taking their life and nobody can understand why because they seem to have everything going for them.
yeah,
Just look at their age. That should tell you everything you need to know because it is a humongous blow to the female system. Estrogen is in practically every cell in the body. And when it starts going offline, the consequences of it going offline affect every single organ in the body, your brain,
right.
your liver, your lungs, your bloodstream, your heart, your everything.
Absolutely. Of course, we're living in a time where we still don't have enough information. There's so much misogyny and misinformation and diminishing, minimizing the woman's symptoms when she comes in and can't even start with having a conversation with her doctor or gynecologist because she doesn't even know. And this is the work that you're doing, thank goodness. And what I am so mission
Passionate
focused on
about. Yes.
myself
Mm,
is that empowerment piece. And
yes.
it honestly begins with creating that knowledge base. Knowledge is power. So if they could
Beyond.
just have that science background to say, you know, you don't have to be an endocrinologist just to understand, as you said, cell receptors receiving estrogen throughout the whole body. Okay, like
Yeah.
we're going to shut off that faucet now.
Mm.
What do you think is going to happen? And then
Yes,
just unpacking it in that way.
correct.
And then from that, I find that in itself light bulb moments for women. Oh, I didn't know that, because we have been conditioned, and that's society has been conditioned to believe, because we rely on the doctor's information, that our hormone, estrogen and progesterone's only role is sexual reproduction.
You just
That's
brought up an
such a
important point. Yes.
so false. So let's dive into that just a little bit more.
Oh,
It's really important for the listeners to understand this.
yes. It diminishes us, and
Yeah.
it's meant to diminish us. You just mentioned misogyny and the patriarchy. It's
Mhm.
meant to diminish us because as women approach their 40s, that is the time in their lives and their careers when they're getting to the top of their career. Now, imagine you have a competition, if you like, or at least there are people who want to be in the same position you are. It's a pyramid system, okay? So they're going to people falling off. Now, imagine you get to maybe the second to the top level, and the people there are looking around each other. And if you are with the typical male way of wanting to do things, they're looking out to knock off the competition. Well, you've got nature to help you by having your hormones taken offline, and so you are not able to compete on the same level. So there is no incentive for your average male to look after the health of his female colleague. No incentive, because he knows once she's off that track, he has open season. So the people
Right.
who are rising to the tops of the industries are male, and women, by the time you take childbirth first and then menopause, they never recover. They
Mm-hmm.
never recover, they never get to their top positions. And I say, guess what? Why don't you find enough women who can build generational wealth? Why is it just the men who are building generational wealth? Because when we get close, your earning capacity is at its most. Your ability to kind of like synthesize everything you've learned, experience, etc. And that's when you're taking offline. You never recover because it's compounded over time. They just keep on going, keep on getting better and better and better, and you are back to not quite starting line, but you're close to starting line, and you can never climb out of that pit that has happened.
Yes.
So we need to
Yes.
be able to, for women to understand that it is integral if they want to go forward. Forbes has a list of the 100 of the most powerful 100 most powerful people in the world, women, and over 80% of them are over 50 years old, which
Oh, great.
tells me that once those women have gotten through menopause properly and function, it's open season. They can now flourish. The ones underneath, whereas the same statistics for men has younger men in a similar position. So you don't have as high a percentage of men at 50 and over compared to under 50, because they don't have those same type of things buffeting their careers and buffeting their lives and buffeting their so it's a perfect storm for women. You're getting to your career zenith, and menopause, perimenopause comes and hits you for 6. It's a storm.
And just knocks you off your game, literally,
Yes,
and puts you back 10 steps, and you're starting all over again. And this
exactly.
is the work as a menopause licensed champion that I have signed on with the Menopause Expert Group, now in 24 countries. I think that number is climbing.
Mm,
Women and men actually are champions as well, are
mm.
advocating and building education awareness, and to get into the workplace, to get into corporations and organizations and have that conversation and bring people together. Like your HR team would bring you together and talk about harassment and hazing and bullying. Well,
Mm.
let's talk about something that's more prevalent and 100% guaranteed, as long as you have female employees and they're in 40 plus years, you will have to deal with menopause. If you're lucky,
Yes.
you can skate through the bullying and harassment, but 100% guaranteed, this is a situation that you will encounter. So, okay, bosses, CEOs, put on your man pants and deal with this like a true gentleman, and ladies too, and lady CEO, and deal with your staff. One of the things that I've been noticing, and this is with my story too, is that we think of it in the workplace and misogyny is it's the men that are knocking the women off of the corporate ladder or the competition for promotion and acceleration. But I'm also seeing it with the younger generation of females who do
Mm.
not yet know what they're in
What's
for menopause. And
they have no
so
clue.
they're not supporting their fellow female staff, whether they're female staff are older than them or the same age group and their peers is that they're not recognizing, oh, watch out, girl.
This
This is
too shall
coming.
pass. This too shall
So
pass.
if you are a fortunate young 30-year-old who happens to be in a managerial position, but you have women under you that are in their 40s and 50s, and you're not supporting them because you have no clue, then you're doing a huge disservice and your time will come. But I would like to change all that. I would like to have that conversation beforehand so that we're all building that awareness and
Yes,
understanding. And then the next step is to integrate accommodations and policies whereby that woman, that the females can take that time, that necessary time for their health to regroup
absolutely.
and to get back and start implementing some of those strategies so that they can get back and
Absolutely.
get over it. And we have heard that in several documented research papers that the years beyond are tremendous. They're wonderful. I have
Oh,
also recently heard, because we're understanding the brain health phenomenon with menopause, that the brain actually, because it's a very clever machine, it's designed to rewire to recover,
exactly. Which we
but
didn't
it
know
does,
before.
which we never knew before. And we're
Yeah.
understanding, of course, diet, nutrition, lifestyle as this
Mm.
huge, can severely impact negatively or influence it positively. But it actually will come back and stronger and better. We
And
just have to
what
give it that
do
time.
women have, which we're very, very good at? The experience. You cannot
Yes.
you cannot have experience without some amount of time. So allowing women to go through this and fall off the workplace, you are losing an important facet. And it
Absolutely.
has economic value of allowing a woman with all that experience to go and to be
And
diminished. It's a loss to not just the company or companies or institutions, it's a loss to the local economies, it's a loss nationally. And they've calculated it, not just a loss to the woman, most people don't care, but they've calculated it what losses it means for countries that having their women not be part of that because of menopause. It's all out there.
yeah, yeah. In fact, it was the Menopause Foundation of Canada came out in October 2023 with the alarming statistics of the cost to the Canadian economy. And
Yeah.
this, again, is a reflection worldwide that losing your best asset, the women who have been building this experience and this knowledge, and then just allowing them to leave. And many of them will leave because they just feel so embarrassed, ashamed, uncertain about their symptoms.
Yes. And they're
I'm
just
this,
being diminished because
uh-huh.
society allows women to be. I remember hearing from a colleague, a male colleague, says, "Oh, that's tightly wound. She's tightly wound." And when I hear those kind of derogatory comments, I can usually tell that it's an older woman and that she is probably going through menopause. I didn't understand what it was, but now I absolutely do. And I have antenna, and it's like, hey, you cannot describe anybody like that. It's you don't know anything about her. How dare you?
Yeah, I would, yeah, exactly. It's just the little comments that we don't think much of, but they can be so
Little needles.
damaging because it's personal. And if you're experiencing it,
Yeah.
it's quite, case in point. Monday morning, we used to sit around and have a quick little conversation before we kicked off our weekly meeting.
Mm.
And everyone would go around the table. Hey, what did you do this weekend? And the young 30-year-olds were talking about these hiking adventures and these kayaking adventures or the things they did with their young children. They came to me and I said, oh my God, I just got caught up on sleep. Like, seriously, I just went to bed and I slept. I'm so tired. And to me, I just thought, like, that's just, hey, that's my life. I'm okay with it. But that was received in such ways that, oh, how depressing. And that was spoken, that was actually said out loud. Oh, if I
Wow.
had your life, I would be so depressed. And
Whoa.
it hit like a dagger going through the heart. It was hard to articulate thereafter how inappropriate it was. And that's when I realized, okay, I'm on a mission to stop this. I'm on a mission to improve it. Nobody really has the intent to cause harm. It's because they're just not aware.
Yeah. And the kind of like, shall we say, I was going to say confidence, but maybe folly of youth to think you're immortal, which you've
Yeah.
mentioned before. And they think, oh, they don't have any concept of what happens down the road. Nothing. And
No.
it's like the minute you hit your 40s, watch out. It actually
Yeah.
starts maybe a few years before you hit 40, but the minute you have reached your 40s, if you're not prepared, you are in for a rude shock.
And it's unfortunate because our parents' generation was not there to prepare us. It was rare to even have that conversation.
Conversation, Mary.
Yeah, that didn't exist. Certainly mothers would inform us about puberty and what was to come, but there was no conversation around the other end.
They didn't know what I go back to my mother. She didn't know what was happening to her either.
Yeah.
She did not know what was happening to her. And even I couldn't help her because I did not realize, like I said in medical school, it was just a very, very clinical, yeah, this going in, this coming out. This is a particular date, 12 months later, it's called menopause. There was nothing that
Mm-hmm.
was, shall we say, vaguely understanding, vaguely empathic, nothing. So I
Yeah.
couldn't help it because I didn't know. It was only years later that I realized that, oh, those mood swings, oh, those whatever. Ah, that must have been menopause years later.
So true. And then we have memories of our mothers in the latter part of their lives just being in a state that just didn't represent who they were truly, because they had no support and they
None.
were navigating through a phase in their life that was just very confusing, emotionally draining.
Yeah.
And then, as we had identified, it takes its toll on all the body's organs. But I'd like to bring it back to something more empowering and encouraging. And this
Yes.
is where I want to talk about what it is we can do. What are the
Mm.
key things? And I think the first thing I would want our listeners to take from this right now, if you can identify what is one of the number one mistakes that we're making, and if by identifying that mistake, it now opens up the door, the pathway for making significant changes to improve our lives, what would that be then?
I think we've been saying it all along, actually. It's awareness. Without awareness, there is no
Yeah,
incentive to do anything. I always start with awareness. It's raising
beautiful.
awareness through everybody, male, female, even children, raising awareness. So there's an understanding of what women in this stage of their lives are going through. And even for the women to say, oh, guess what? When I get to this stage of life, I'll know and I'll be able to take action sooner. Awareness, awareness, awareness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then with that awareness, then becomes the acceptance, and then
Yeah. And saying
the
it's natural, it's not a disease, it's
yeah.
not being treated, it's being managed. Language matters. It is not a disease. It is not treated. It is being managed. It's being supported. But it is not a disease. And once we know it's not a disease and it happens to every woman, just live long enough, it'll happen to you. Then there is more of an empathic stand, more of an understanding of what's going on. And that will make the ripples will extend further. As you said, we have menfolk who support us, who are right there in the pits and saying, hey, let's get this out there. I want this information to get to my sister, my female colleague, my very good friend. They want the information and they want to know how to support them. Because one of the things men are scared about is like, okay, now I've heard about it. How do I support her? I have no clue.
It's problematic in the relationship with our male partners.
Oh,
You're asking the male population in those communities and workplaces to have support, and they don't even know how to do it for their own partners. Or
yes.
yeah,
And once they realize that, guess what? This can be temporary, but how do we support? And they'll be happy to because they want to see what's best for their loved ones. And it's like, okay, this is not permanent. This is not something, because if we were told that you just go lie down, your life is over, nothing good is going to come after all these years, you just tossed away like a bad whatever. And you say you're in Canada as well. I don't know if you remember what happened to Lisa LaFlamme.
uh,
Beyond shameful, beyond shameful. And what one person said, which I always remember because I read all about it, was that, oh, because she went gray, eh? Said, oh, she
that's
didn't
right.
ask his permission before she went gray. I
Uh,
beg your pardon? How dare you think that you had any agency over her life? She has to ask you permission to go gray. Since when did Lloyd Robertson ask permission to go gray?
or Peter Mansbridge, or lose his hair. Yeah,
Yes, or lose his hair.
exactly.
Something entirely natural for him. And he left when he was, I think, 70 something, 73 or something. She was 50, maybe 6 or 7 when she was let go. How do
It's a
you,
tragedy.
if it isn't sexism mixed with a healthy dose of misogyny, tell me what else it is.
That's right. And that's another point we've been tapping in on is ageism on
Ageism,
top of
absolutely ageism.
sexism too.
But ageism is just one of those things that basically is a poor substitute because men will say, okay, we suffer from ageism as well, but it's a poor substitute for truly, truly misogyny and whatever you want to call it. They say age. That's not the entire story. It's gender discrimination. And it's based on menopause. So it's a combination of it. I can't find a job too. That's not the entire story. You can find a job 10 times easier than a female in the same position.
Yes. So what would be some of the first steps they can do now with the awareness piece to start empowering themselves, taking agency, and without being entirely rude or overly aggressive, I guess you can say, but just being able to approach her male colleagues?
Assertive. They need to be assertive. They need to know what they want, and they need to be assertive. This is not the time to be a shrinking violet. It doesn't work because bullies will always continue bullying until you stop them and say, hey, you can't do that. So they need to know that they are worth more than, and it cannot just be defined as a phrase called perimenopause and menopause. It's not them. It is just something that happens, but it is not them. It does not define them, and it's not their only story, if you like. And if they can assert themselves and say, yes, I deserve to be able to have a place, a soft landing. This is natural. It's nothing I've done. I am not at fault, and therefore you cannot pin it onto me.
It's nothing I've done. It's the biology of my body.
Exactly. Once that is clear, say, it's nothing I've done. So don't start trying to guilt trip me into my body doing what it's meant to do.
So when women come to you and they want to work with you, let's talk about some of the steps, and without giving it all away, because we're going to encourage our listeners to check you out. Okay. But what are some of those steps?
Like I said, I have the superpowers, which you saw on the site. It used to be like 5 superpowers. And what I did was simplify it a bit because it's not all that difficult, to be honest. It is, the first one is to, like I said, generate that energy. So you generate that energy. Modes of generating energy include sleep, which is a foundation. I always say, you sleep well, you can do almost practically anything. So sleep is a foundation, but you need to generate energy so that you don't feel so, can't find the strength, can't find the stamina, can't concentrate, can't whatever. So you find that, generate energy. Then the next one, they're not really steps, because what I do is they work in harmony. They are compound interest. So you take a little bit of this and a little bit of that and a little bit of that. And instead of 2 plus 2 plus 2 equals 6, you have 2 times 2 times 2 equals 8. And the more you put into there, the more you get a massive return of interest, just like money, of what you put in. So if you put in a small amount of money into your retirement fund, you're going to collect much more out of it with some time. So if you add the correct things together and you put them in the right proportions, you don't have to do 100% of, say, get everything right about your sleep or get everything right about your diet. You don't have to. You just get the right things that tweak the needle. If you like the 80% and the 20% that give you 80% of the results, what are they? We identify them for each individual so that the results, when they come out, are stupendous, because you haven't wasted your time trying to get everything perfect about sleep or everything perfect about nutrition or all the other things to do with generating energy. You just take the important bits. So that's the energy generation bit, which is, like I said. The next bit is your mental or brain health. I don't call it mental, I call it brain health. Because as you said, we know that the brain regenerates itself. How can you make sure that you can continue with your brain cells developing new pathways, being able to keep that memory like Queen Elizabeth did until she was 96 or something, sharp as a tack? How do you do that? And whereas you see other people who are losing their memories in their 60s, how can you allow those pathways to build? How do you strengthen them? And there are techniques to strengthen them, and it's not all to do, it's not just puzzles and Sudoku, those kind of things. No, there's a lot more to it, which is why they work in consonance with your lifestyle factors. And then, of course, there is, as I said, because of the estrogen being reduction, elevating your cortisol, you also have reducing your stress, relieving your level of anxiety, and being able to cope with particularly chronic stress, not allowing it to take over your life. Chronic stress leads to so many bad things. Acute stress is actually not bad in that it usually stimulates you to do something. Chronic stress is the real. So stress on its own is not the problem. Chronic stress is the problem. And if you can get to a place where you say, guess what? Somebody just pissed me off right now, but I have the ability to shake my tail feathers and move on from there. And it doesn't become this grinding background in there. you're going to be fine. But
Yeah.
stress is what actually builds your muscles because you take it to a place where you're stressing it and it decides to break some fibers and then build fibers. We need stress in our lives, just not too much of it.
That's right. Yes. And managing it is so critical because with the estrogen egress, that's a stress unto itself. And so the cortisol levels staying spiked longer and they're not coming down. And of course, that
Exactly.
keeps us in the sympathetic nervous drive. The
Exactly.
autonomic
You've just
nervous
mentioned it.
system is in
Exactly.
overdrive.
When I realized it was so important, I mean, what the consequences of not dealing with menopause is that menopause itself is an aging accelerant. Just the process of menopause itself accelerates aging, which is why you have women who live longer but have a longer period of illness than men who don't live as long, but their period of illness doesn't tend to be anywhere near as long as females. So the ones you find males you have in nursing homes are the fit ones, are the kind of like 70-year-old, and the women are 90-year-old and doddery. Menopause, when not dealt with, will accelerate aging. If all we did is realize that it will accelerate your aging, I think we will have much more incentive to deal with it. So you don't end up in a nursing home, fractured hips and whatever, losing your marbles. None of that needs to happen.
So good. That's what I like to encourage when I speak with women too, is have a vision for yourself. Create where you expect to be beyond the midlife transition in the years beyond. And
Absolutely.
create a vision statement for yourself. And then, as we would often say when I was in the military, is begin with the end in mind. Like, what's the end state? That's your mission.
Fantastic. Love it.
Yeah.
Love it. I
Dr.
mean, that
Teo,
is powerful.
this, it's so powerful. And just like this conversation alone, and I really believe that the listeners should get out of this, is the fact that you and I are having this conversation and we're very forthright and assertive in what we have to say about building the awareness and
Yes.
breaking down the old social construct surrounding menopause and the lack of information. And there are so many out there in this field now, and it just delights me. I'm delighted to be part of that. As a menopause doula, an educator, we're just the experts of none, generalists of all, right? We take everybody else's expert information and we share it. And this is my arena to do that. It's this podcast, of course. But I'm really excited to press upon the listeners that in this conversation was the empowerment piece, taking agency. And it all begins with having that conversation and being bold enough to say, hey, boss, or hey, colleague at work, you need to be aware of this. But that begins with getting educated herself.
Yes, indeed.
And
Absolutely.
what you've shared is an amazing education piece. Before we wrap it up, I always like to ask my guest, if I remember to do it, what is their favorite read? What's a book that would speak to who you are and how's it shaped your journey?
I have read a lot of books. I love reading, but one that sparked my interest a long time ago, and I think is still relevant, is Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill.
Oh, I love that. My fave. Yes,
Oh, wow.
my favorite.
Wow. I just saw it in a bookstore. I was browsing at the time when we all went to bookstores, and all I saw was a spine. And it wasn't about getting rich. There was just something about the book, and I flipped it open. And having bought it, I think I must have finished it pretty much the same day or the next day.
Yeah,
And I still have a copy by my bedside.
so
I've read
good.
many other books. My bookshelf is full, but it is because what a lot of rich, not in the rich monetary sense of things, even though that is there. It is rich in your mind, in
Yes,
yourself.
yes. And I think so powerful just that the very first word is like not become rich, it's think, which means you plant it in the mind first and foremost. That is step number one.
Think. Like thinking is the hardest things we do as human beings. Why do
Yeah.
people not make decisions? They don't want to think. Thinking is the hardest thing. Sit down and have a moment and think is the hardest things for us as humans to do.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, when we're tired and overtaxed and the brain is not firing on all full cylinders, in this case, estrogen, it is hard And so that brings it back to the foundational piece you said about getting the energy is the sleep foundational, because we can't think properly. We can't make really important decisions when we're lacking sleep. And it is now a major health issue,
Yes.
a brain
Oh,
health issue, a mental health issue.
huge. It's all you get sleep right, and therefore you have the ability to get everything else about your health and your life right. It's my firm
Yeah.
belief. And I know
Yeah.
you think the same as well. You get sleep right, you can get everything. Everything else is fixable.
Yeah.
Everything.
Yeah. What would be the one piece of advice then for your clients, listeners around sleep, just to help them structure sleep? One thing that they could do.
One thing they could do, I have a whole list as you can imagine,
Yes.
but what I found lately is getting into bed at least an hour and a half before midnight.
Good point. Yes.
A lot of people, they say, oh, I hit the snooze button. I didn't have a good night's sleep. My first question is, what time do you go to bed? Oh, I had work to do. It was like midnight or it was 1 o'clock. The sleep after midnight is not as effective as a sleep before midnight. And we're not just talking 11:59. We are talking give it enough time to have one sleep cycle. Now, assuming one sleep cycle is 90 minutes, and
Uh-huh.
assuming you spend 15 minutes to fall asleep, although most people take somewhere between 20 and 30 minutes. But if you do sleep well with your good sleep habits, you should be able to fall asleep in 15 minutes. But okay, let's make it 30 minutes. So if you have a 90-minute cycle, at another 30 minutes, that's 2 hours. It means you should be in bed by 10. Which
Yes.
means lights out, your head on the pillow, you're not doom scrolling on Instagram or anything like that. Your devices are shut off, airplane mode, your head is on the pillow, the lights are out, and you're in the act of, I am going to sleep. 10 o'clock.
So good. I love that. Doom scrolling. It's true. Any scrolling that happens by the time you're prepared for bed is not good
Yes.
scrolling,
You've
and
just
nothing
you've just
happens.
you've just sabotaged your sleep.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And you're thinking, because
Yeah.
you've probably gone into comparison mode, saw something that just got you all fired up, and that cortisol level now is racing and you're doomed. Nothing good happens after midnight. So get to bed before midnight. Such a good piece of information. I think Napoleon Hill should have had that in his 13, I think it was 13 strategies for success. I think
Yes.
there should have
Yes.
been one on sleep alone. And if he
Yeah,
was ever alive today to rewrite another version of that
I
book, I
think
think
so.
he would address social media head on.
Yes. And just our lifestyle habits a bit more.
True.
What he did was address the mores of the time. I think now he would have a different way of addressing certain things.
Yeah, this is very true, because they did
Mm.
100 years ago and it was written, I think around the 1930s. It was all written and stands the test of time because it was to address restructuring the world after the Great Depression
Yeah.
and the rise of capitalism. But I really think now we didn't have issues about poor health and over processed foods
No.
and
Oh,
a high sugary that didn't
oh,
exist back then. And
no.
it's a shame that we can't go back to those times for
Yeah.
for food reasons alone. But thank you for sharing that book. It's I'm going to get that in the show notes for sure.
Ah, thank you.
Encourage our listeners. I keep a copy. I love it. I have the audio copy on Spotify. I'll play it all the time, but I actually do keep a copy with me in my car,
Oh,
because
wow.
I just
Oh,
want him to
wow.
be with me everywhere I go. I just feel like, or
Yeah.
if I were stuck on the side of the road, I have a good book to read and I'll be fine.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'll think
No,
my way out of my problems.
and there were a whole lot of people, some before him, Wallace Wattles, etc. But
Yeah,
it was this one that really sparked my interest, and I thought, oh, 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 and therefore it expanded ripples from there. And
so
it was just
practical.
looking at a cover. So we trust our intuition. Our intuition will give us answers.
And you should come back, because I think you and I alone could have a discussion on intuition, a woman's intuition alone. And that speaks to the good years after menopause, because wow, when that intuition, that third eye is opened up, and the energy is flowing,
Mm.
women can do everything, anything and everything. And that's what the world needs. It's more
My sincere
empathetic.
opinion is that women will, when I say rule the world, I don't mean rule as in dictator, more like rescue, but I don't
Yeah,
want to use the word rescue. But we are going to be the making of the next era of true Earth coming together.
I believe so. I mentioned earlier about asking what is the number one mistake that women are making? Now, not only have you given us a great tip, you've compiled it into a book. Tell us about your book.
Well, it's called Menopause Mistakes, the 10 critical mistakes high performing women over 40 make. And yes, I've got 10 mistakes. And as we discovered, as we've talked about, the first bit is burying your head in the sand.
Oh, so
Just
good.
as we said, it's important to be not caught unawares. And but there's a whole lot more. And not only do I mention the mistakes there, I also mention possible things you could do in the meantime before you get any help from Mary or, myself. What you can do in the meantime so that you know what those mistakes are and you know how to go about fixing them.
And where can we find your book?
It's on Amazon, amazon.ca, .com, and I think .co.uk.
Perfect. Well, make sure that's also in the show notes. Thank you for sharing that book, Menopause Mistakes. So tell us, can any of our listeners get a little taste of your special offerings in advance?
Absolutely. I have this wonderful power pack that anybody, I'll give you the links to it, Mary, that they can get a taste of getting them started on that journey. It's important. And yeah, I am more than pleased to be able to offer this wonderful free gift to your listeners.
Oh, thank you so much. We'll get that link to that free offering in our show notes. Thank you again. It's been fantastic conversation.
Ah, I love it. And we have so much to talk about, Mary. So much.
This has been so incredible. Let our listeners know where they can find you.
The best place to get me right now is on my website, and
Okay.
it's got a quirky name. I'll spell it out for you. It is getyoursassyback.com, which is getyoursassyback.com, because we all should get our sassy back.
Yes. We'll get that in the show notes as well. Thank you again so much for sharing your knowledge and your expertise and your enthusiasm.
Thank
It's been
you,
a
Mary.
pleasure.
Yeah, I appreciate the invitation, and I've just enjoyed this session tremendously.
I hope this conversation with Dr. Tayo has disrupted your thought process about menopause, how to treat your symptoms, how to address it in the workplace, and how to advocate for your health. But my key takeaway from this episode is the focus of a lot of my work today as a menopause doula and educator, and that is the lack of support for menopausal women in the workplace. And this is such a significant issue that impacts not only the individual well-being, but also the economy as a whole. According to an alarming report from the Menopause Foundation of Canada, October 2023, I'll link that in the show notes, the absence of adequate resources and understanding regarding menopause affects women's health, productivity, job satisfaction, and leading to detrimental consequences for organizations and the economy. Here's some shocking stats. According to the report by the Foundation, the economic impact of unmanaged menopause symptoms here in Canada is 3.5 billion annually, including 237 million in lost productivity. And according to a 2021 survey conducted in the United States, 42% of women said they've considered leaving their job because of menopause. 70% didn't speak about menopause with their employer. 53% felt it wasn't necessary to speak up, 26% felt too embarrassed, and 28% said they were afraid it would make them look incapable of doing their job properly. This is why it's so imperative that we prioritize awareness and create supportive environments for menopausal women at work. And leading organizations today are stepping up as menopause champions, advocating for policies and practices that foster understanding and support for this natural phase of life. For example, cereal manufacturer Kellogg Company is training managers on how to talk about menopause. The multinational telecommunications firm Vodafone is introducing a toolkit focused on raising understanding, and offering staff the ability to take leave for sickness or medical treatments. The global insurance company RSA Group is on the path to becoming a menopause-friendly accredited employer. In 2021, it launched a campaign called Pause for Thought and confirmed the organization's commitment to becoming accredited as a menopause-friendly workplace. These are just some of the examples, and you can learn more about these initiatives in my blog that I'll have in my show notes about menopause at work. As I wrap up this episode, I want you to remember, with the right tools and the right community support, it is possible to thrive through this phase of life. So I want to thank you for joining us today, and I hope you feel inspired to take charge of your menopause journey. If you got some value out of today's episode, or any episode, please be sure to share with a friend and consider leaving a review on Apple. Your feedback will help me reach more women who can benefit from these conversations. Until next time, my lovelies, stay empowered, stay informed. Remember, menopause should be best life, and it will be. Namaste.